Yeah. Um, in this discussion of information and energy, but also complexity, the word order always is used. And order is another one of these terms that I have an intuitive understanding of, though I don't quite know exactly what it is. You know, we'd be able to point to something that has order, but particularly in instances of life where there is so much going on. But there is, like my state, my current state is being perpetuated across time and all that. So there is some order there. But this term order is something that I also struggle with at times. So how do you conceive of order, at least in this in this discussion of life and information?
Yes, they have to be very careful, and there's a lot of confusion, and words like order and organization tend to be lumped together, and sometimes they can be, sometimes they're the opposites. So when it comes to fundamental physics, we're in much better shape, as usual. The terms are defined very carefully. And if we go right back to Maxwell's demon, thermodynamics, boxes of gas, and so on, I'll give you a very simple example that will make this clear. Imagine if we have a flask of oxygen and a flask of nitrogen, and we put these together, then wait for a bit and the oxygen and the nitrogen will intermingle until they're uniformly spread. And we know it's impossible to separate them out again, that this is an irreversible one-way process, the mixing, intermingling of the gases. But it's very clear that the original state, with the gases separated out, is more ordered than the final state, with them intermingled. And that's an example where physicists define a term called entropy, which is a measure of the disorder. And they would say that the initial state is a low entropy state and the final state is a high entropy state. And the condition of thermodynamic equilibrium, when nothing further is going to happen, is the maximum entropy state. And all this was sort of worked out a long time ago. I also like the analogy with a pack of cards. If you go, I've never done this, by the way, but if you go to a shop and buy a pack of cards and open them, they'll be neatly arranged in suit and numerical order. I assume that's true. It's a part of the folklore. And then if you shuffle the cards, they'll of course be less ordered after the shuffling. And again, if you go to a magician and say, give them this shuffle pack of cards and say, shuffle it back into suit and numerical order, and they shuffle for a bit and give it back to you in that suit and numerical order, you'll know that there's a trick involved, because you'll know that it would take a stupendous amount of time to actually find the combination that would get you right back. And so that's another good example. A shuffle pack of cards is disorderly. So you can apply this on a cosmic scale. You can say, well, if the entire universe is sliding towards a state of thermodynamic equilibrium, often called the heat death of the universe, it must have started out more ordered. So the beginning of the universe must have been more ordered than it is now. And that is indeed true. It would take us a bit off topic for me to discuss that, but what we know about the very early universe, it was actually much simpler, more smooth than it is now when we look at, compare a galaxy, or the complexity of all the stars in their orbits and so on, with just a big splodge of gas, which is how it started out. Again, you'll see that the universe began in a more ordered state. It's now in a less ordered state, and in the future it'll be even less ordered than it is now. But delving into the details of that is actually very much at the forefront of physics. It involves things like quantum black holes. You have to understand those, how they fit into the picture. And I'm not going to get into it here. But basically, there's a very clear story. But when it comes to life, then it gets very murky, because now Erwin Schrödinger, which in many ways he was the person who started this whole enterprise, in 1943 gave a series of lectures in Dublin in Ireland, which was neutral in the Second World War. So Schrödinger was sheltering from the war. And he gave these lectures with the title, What is Life? And it became a very influential book. And he put his finger on it because he said that a non-living system will tend to go from order to disorder, often called the second law of thermodynamics, but life tends to create more order from order. So it's an orderly thing that makes more order. And so he saw one of the fundamental properties of life as its ability to turn order into order and not degenerate into disorder. And I think that's pretty obvious. You know, if you seal up a living organism in a box, it will die and decay into the degenerated state of disorder. And in order to keep it alive, you have to have a throughput of energy and entropy. It's got to be open to its environment. So some people have latched on to this creating order out of chaos. They think life is somehow flying in the face of the laws of thermodynamics. It's going sort of backwards. Well, it's not, because living systems are always open systems, and any order that they create, any reduction in entropy, is paid for by the chaos, if you like, that is exported into the wider environment. And the same thing with Maxwell's demon. If you get down to the level of individual molecular interactions, it looks like you're getting a free lunch. It looks like by turning information into work, you can have a perpetual motion machine. But when you look at the specific details, there's always a price to be paid. But life is very happy, of course, to go right up to that margin. Life is in the business of processing information and hugely, and it wants to do that at a very low thermodynamic cost. Otherwise, it would cook itself to death, because every time you erase information or reset an information register, you generate heat. And that's why laptops get so hot on the lap. It's because they're processing information with an entropy cost. And life, the example I love to give is if you think of the human brain, it's got the power of computational power of a megawatt supercomputer, but it doesn't expend megawatts, it expends the equivalent of a dim light bulb. So it's a dramatic example of the extraordinary energy efficiency that these little Maxwell demons in our brains, and they really are there. They're very much like Maxwell's original demon, operating, opening and closing little shutters to send nerve signals from one neuron to another. All of that shows the ability of life to maximize its efficiency and lower its thermodynamic cost. Coming back to your original question, order and disorder, is life ordered? Well, in the strict, rather limited thermodynamic sense, it is ordered, but I think it fails to capture what I regard as the true magic of life, which is this word organization. That it's not enough to say that it's ordered. After all, a crystal is ordered, but in a rather boring way. And so life occupies this intermediate position between the boring order of a crystal and the boring uniformity of say, a gas in thermodynamic equilibrium, which is certainly very complex in a way, but it's a very uninteresting type of complexity. Life sits in the middle, where it is complex organization or complex order. We can bandy these words around, but in a way that we would like to be able to define rather more precisely. And that gets me to the heart of my book, because what I've tried to do in this book is to start out with Maxwell's demon and the demon in the machine, looking at these thermodynamic aspects, the molecular efficiency and so on, but point out very quickly that life goes beyond this, that life involves not just information processing, but information management and control on a global scale. It's not just a local thing. It's not just a molecule at one place doing one little thing and saving some energy. It's the way that in living organisms, the information is integrated across many length scales and time scales, and fulfills this type of management role, which we use this term organization. It looks like organized information management, not just sort of piecemeal. It's not just a hodgepodge of little bits of information processing all glued together. There is some coherent processes going on. And that's where the definition of information needs to be widened to include that aspect of coherence and control. You couldn't want a better example than the development of the embryo. When you think about that, of course, there's information processing going on. Genes are being read. There's networks of genes that switch each other on and off. Information flowing around those networks. And this is not just information processing for its own sake. It's coupled to chemical networks and chemical gradients in order for cells to grow in one place and not another, and differentiate into different forms. So what you're seeing in the development of the embryo is a sort of choreography which is being managed by networks of information, genetic and chemical networks coupled together to bring about this organized, coherent whole on a global scale. Now, defining information that encompasses that degree of management, or really can't avoid using the term semantics, is very difficult. So I'm using the term semantics because if you ask a biologist what is a gene, it's not just n bits of information. It's a set of instructions. And what does instructions mean? Instructions only mean something if there is a system, a molecular system. In this case, it has to do with the ribosome and all the various enzymes that make that work, that has to interpret that information and implement the instructions. So the term meaning seems to go here. The information in a gene has to mean something. If it's just junk, it doesn't mean anything, and it is not biologically functional. So pinning down that notion that here is so many bits of information, which are not just any old bits, but are instructions or meaningful bits, or they have semantic content. Trying to get a mathematical definition of that is really, really tough. It's an outstanding problem. I know people who work on it. They try to see if they can formalize that in some way. But at the end of the day, I think we're going to need to find new laws. I think new physics is lurking in living matter, which will have as their basis this notion of, to use a more neutral term, contextual information. Meaning, of course, is a loaded term, but context, I think, is a rather neutral one, that the information in a gene and elsewhere in biology has to be seen in the context of the organism as a whole. And this goes against hundreds of years of tradition in physics, which is that we tend to look, when we talk about cause and effect, we concentrate on local interactions, what's happening at a point. And so, if you take the example of electric forces, what's going on there? Well, you can look at a particle like an electron. Does it have an electric charge or not? So it does have a charge, and that charge is, as it were, on the electron. It's locally identified. At that point, there is the charge. But if you look at a base pair in DNA and say, is that part of biological instruction, or is it just a bit of junk? Is it a mutation? What is it? You can't tell. You've got to look at the whole system. And defining laws of physics that relate the whole to the part is a really tough one. It's not unprecedented in physics, happens in quantum mechanics, but it's unfamiliar to most physicists. And so part of the reason we can't write down the laws of life right now is because they will evolve in some way, connecting what's going on locally with the totality of the system. And that's a tough one.